Okay, it's 7:33 p.m. Welcome back. Sarfaraz Takolia here, and I'll be with you till 9 p.m. inshallah tonight. If you've just tuned in, welcome to one and all on Facebook, on YouTube, on the Salam Media TuneIn app, as well as the Smart Bilal app as well, and all those from around the country and around the globe as well. Salam, namaste, duelang your aunt, wherever you are from. All right, now it's time for Tech Talk. So tonight, the Free State is the topic of discussion. Now, the Free State is due to start losing TV signal from March. Now, don't panic. No need for panic just yet. The Department of Communications obviously released a statement saying they intend to switch off analog TV signal distribution, obviously in the more rural parts of the Free State, and is now committed to completing digital migration by, perhaps end of the year or so, which is around about, I think, 10 or 12 years late now. I mean, we switched to digital around 2010 when it was the World Cup. Now, to give us more on this topic, we welcome Jan van Malen tonight from My Broadband, and we are going to be discussing everything about digital TV and also next-gen mobile systems such as 5G. We welcome Jan van Malen to the program.
Hi there.
Jan van Malen. Jan, good evening. Welcome once again to Salam Media.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Awesome stuff. Great to have you with us. And now obviously the Free State is in the spotlight since yesterday. And I mentioned to the listeners in the intro that no need for panic just yet. Your televisions aren't going to be switched off tonight. You got TV on analog until March or so. Now, Jan, first thing, before we get into the discussion about the Department of Communications intention and the migration to digital for the Free State. Around 2010, and obviously coming from an ICT background, we merged obviously with VoIP. We then switched from analog to digital for our broadcasts of the 2010 World Cup, which increased our quality, and we got smart TVs and HD TVs, etc. So now we're 12 or so years later, and now the Free State is now on the verge of migrating from analog to digital. Why now all of a sudden 12 years later? I mean, obviously, the department says they committed to it, and based on obviously Gauteng and other cities and other provinces who I have obviously got digital now, right? Well, that's one thing. But now, and you're shaking your head. Okay, why would you say that?
Yeah. So no, the whole problem here is that South Africa did not migrate to digital TV. And so there was this huge propaganda around it before the Soccer World Cup that South Africa would be switching to digital TV and we'd be broadcasting. Yep. Never happened. It was supposed to happen and it never happened. And I remember I started working at My Broadband in 2010, and one of the sort of first extremely high profile stories I got to work on was I went to a press conference with Mnet and ETV together. Now nowadays they're fighting one another over this thing, but back then Mnet and ETV sat around the same table and they said, we have a problem because the DG of communications has thrown into question which standard South Africa is going to migrate to for digital TV. So to get technical for a second, South Africa had decided, this process had started back in 2005 or earlier, perhaps even slightly earlier than that. And over the course of several years, experts investigated the space and decided that South Africa would switch to a standard called Digital Video Broadcasting Terrestrial, DVB-T. Now, it made sense for us to do that because it was a standard developed in Europe. We are currently on the PAL system, which is also a European standard.
Just to pause you there. This was supposed to be for the SABC or for pay TV services like DSTV, just so we're clear.
Everybody was meant to be able to access this. So people might not know this, but or might not remember, but Mnet has an analog terrestrial channel. You used to be able to just buy Mnet alone before DSTV, right? And you could catch it over
early
UHF
90s.
antenna.
Yes.
That thing still exists. And in fact, MultiChoice right now offers a digital TV equivalent, a digital TV service called GoTV. It's not very widely marketed in South Africa, but it exists. And so digital TV is switched on, and you can access it, but it's not really widely used. Now we'll get to what the significance of this is actually going to be at the end of the day. But the bottom line is that everybody, SABC, ETV, MultiChoice, everybody would be able to use this digital TV system. Now, it was going to require quite a major change. So firstly, your normal TV, if you catch a TV signal with bunny ears or an antenna on the roof, you might not be able to catch the digital TV signal. The antenna on the roof should work, but the bunny ears definitely won't, right? And so, and then the other thing was your TV itself.
Right.
The tuner that's built into your TV, which you have to pay a TV license for, is an analog tuner that is still designed for the old PAL broadcasting system. So to convert from that analog to a digital system, you need a special converter box called a set-top box, an STB. You can think of it as a decoder. So you'd temporarily have to have a decoder for digital TV until digital TV native TVs become available in South Africa, right? And so there was this huge project underway to roll out DVB-T decoders around the country. But it's important to keep in mind, these DVB-T decoders are temporary. Eventually what happens is the analog tuners in TVs get replaced. It's old tech. You don't ship TVs with that old analog tuner in it anymore because you can't use it. So you build digital tuners into the TV. Now we still, as far as I know, don't have TVs in South Africa with digital tuners built in. I expect because it drives up the price and because it's not clear that it's going to be useful. But the ultimately that's what would have happened. But now so here's the situation. In 2010, this DG of communications says that we are going to re-examine the whole digital video standard. We're not convinced that DVB-T is the correct choice anymore. We are now looking at a different standard called ISDBT, which I don't remember what that stands for. And specifically, a subset, a different version, a variant of that standard, like the COVID variant, the South African COVID variant. We now have this special ISDBT variant from Brazil called ISDBTB. Later, it emerged that what had happened was that the government's pals from Brazil had come over and said, hey, this BRICS thing is we need to have further collaboration between our countries. So how about instead of you using the DVB-T standard, you use the ISDB standard so that we can have like a sharing of resources between our countries. But really what Brazil wanted was for us to start buying their software.
Now, you mentioned BRICS, and I'm looking at obviously the Brazilian digital television system, right? DVTS, right? SBT and ISDB-T, right? So now I'm seeing countries like Brazil, Argentina, Peru, Botswana, Chile, Honduras, Ecuador, Paraguay. They've all, based on Japanese standards, that's what it is. I've obviously got this since 2007, and Sao Paulo has obviously had this since then. So now, do you think because of obviously now, as you mentioned, BRICS and obviously Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, we now moving to this standard? Is this possibly one of the contributing factors?
No,
based on BRICS relations, or no?
So what it caused was a delay. A dithering, because now what happened was government threw the whole process into disarray. We were set to switch to digital video broadcasting terrestrial, DVB-T, by 2011, if memory serves. That was going to be the analog switch-off date, right? Centec had already started broadcasting test signals on digital. It was probably in preparation for the Soccer World Cup. Yeah. So Centec was ready. Everything was set for this big digital migration. But then because the DG and the minister, allowed this controversy and the whole decision about the standard to be reopened rather than sticking with the original decision, the decision that had been made and written into government policy. And it was final. It was final. We were going to DVB-T, but now the DG said, "Oh no, we're throwing out all of that. We're going to ISDB-T." or we're going to look. She didn't say we're going to ISDB-TV. She said we're going to look at it. Right. And so there was this, I remember for the better part of the year, man, I was called into press briefings at Centec Towers. There were Japanese technologists there to show us how great ISDBT was and all that stuff. And it's a fine standard, don't get me wrong. But unfortunately, what happened here was probably unlawful. You can't just throw out a standard without following some sort of process. Okay. And it delayed everything. And so now what eventually happened was a new Minister of Communications took over, Roy Pariachi. And towards the end of 2011 is when all of this information emerged. He confirmed that the whole reason for the ISDB-TB debacle was because the South African government was trying to be friendly with the Brazilians and trying to hear them out and whatever the case might be. But in doing this small thing, this thing that seems so small, like we'll just investigate the standard, they wrecked South Africa's hopes of migrating to digital TV on time. And now what happened was, because they reopened this can of worms, Roy Pariachi did the obvious thing. He said, okay, great. So while we have the opportunity, we are going to migrate. Instead of migrating from DVB to DVB-T, we're going to migrate to the newest version, DVB-T2. There was already a sequel out. And so why go to T1 when you can go to T2? But now a whole bunch of policy had to be rewritten. And this is where MultiChoice and ETV then start going at this and going, okay, well, if we're going to rewrite this thing, now we're going to disagree. Then they start disagreeing on whether signals should be encrypted or not. So ETV argues that an encryption module should be built into the decoder for what they call conditional access, right? Okay. And this is to prevent. So there's so many arguments about this, but the bottom line was that ETV felt that or argued to government that government is going to have these decoders that need to be rolled out to poorer communities and rural communities, like in the Free State now, so that people can continue to catch their TV signals. They're going to need these new decoders, these set-top boxes. But government is going to have to subsidize those for the poorest households in the country, because not everybody will be able.
Government has got a budget enough to cater for this. I mean, we're talking a popular. What would you think of the national footprint?
Yeah, so some money has been set aside for this, and remember, this is only for the poorest of the poor, indigent households. So you don't have to do it for the whole of South Africa.
Areas. Yeah.
Yes. And so some of those folks can't afford 300 to 1,000 rand for a new decoder, whatever it's going to cost.
Yes.
And so government, initially it was going to be free to indigent households, but government can't do free anymore. So it's just heavily subsidizing it. So ETV warned that if you do not put conditional access into these decoders, what's going to happen is you're going to provide them to indigent households, and they're just going to get scalped overseas in other countries that use DVB-T. And so there was this whole fight about conditional access and encryption. Even though they're two different things, they were kind of conflated into one thing. Conditional access and encryption was turned into like one big argument, but they're actually two separate arguments. The bottom line is MultiChoice didn't want the encryption built into the decoder. They said it was going to be too expensive. But more than that, they said that effectively government would be subsidizing ETV's entry into pay TV. And they say it's unfair that government basically allows ETV to become a pay TV channel provider without having to invest in developing their own decoders, in rolling out their own decoders, because the poorest households in South Africa were all getting these decoders essentially for free, which immediately gives ETV a great footprint to roll out its competitor to DSTV out on. And so MultiChoice didn't want that, and ETV wanted it, and so that caused them to fight, and it locked this whole thing up in court battles for years, to the point where let me just remind everybody, the digital migration was supposed to be finished actually for the Soccer World Cup in 2010, but that never happened.
Yes. Now,
The
talking
actual
about
deadline,
World
the
Cup.
actual deadline was 2011.
Yeah.
Now we are in 2021, 10 years after the deadline, and we still haven't migrated. We still haven't migrated to digital TV completely, and now it's irrelevant. Who cares about digital TV anymore, really? I mean, there's going to be a handful of households in the country that might gain some benefit from this, but mostly folks are on some sort of satellite. They either use OpenView, or they use StarSat's cheapest package, or they use DSTV's cheapest package for 30 Rand a month, DSTV access. And like, you know, the number of people who are still receiving TV over bunny ears, I think, is so vanishingly small now. And your rich households are all moving off of broadcast anyway and onto streaming.
And I agree with it. You know,
that this whole thing has become irrelevant.
I mean, and you mentioned that there's hardly many households now using bunny TV, because basically I've, you know, driven the country, and in the work we do, obviously, you know, in media space, etc. We travel a lot, and I've seen in the informal areas as well, many satellites have been erected, be it OpenView or whatever, HD TV. I don't want to, you know, name brands, but anyway. Now, Jan, you mentioned a decade later. Now, this is where we find ourselves now. In March, the more rural parts of the Free State are going to start moving on to this, as the department is so-called saying, all right? As part of an aggressive approach for this migration 11 years later now. So they've said, okay, fine, they've now agreed to this. Digital TV signals use, in my understanding, a scarce radio spectrum. How's this now going to be affected?
Yes.
Because obviously radio spectrum, we know, is obviously quite strained, because obviously there's the supposed migration, digital migration for, you know, platform services to move on to radio now. Now, wouldn't you think that this is going to contribute to that?
Yeah. So
or add strain to the existing spectrum that we have available.
So it's actually going to help things. So this is the one thing that this is good for, because
this migration is actually good for.
Yeah, it's actually good for releasing spectrum. It's called the digital dividend. And that is the one reason that this is actually happening. And so, you know, while, you know, as I said, there might be some fringe benefits, a handful of households in South Africa might actually be using this service at the end of the day. The fact is that the real reason government is pushing ahead with this aggressively is it needs to migrate analog TV signals out of certain high demand frequency bands, so that that spectrum can be licensed to mobile network operators or just wireless network operators for 4G and 5G. That's the real reason for this.
This is now allowing for the aggressive rollout for 5G, and there's been such hype and demand about 5G, as we mentioned. So this is actually a good thing to allow for more spectrum for those operators. So basically, the likes of the 5G and ISPs, etc., are now going to benefit from this and allow, obviously. So it's a kind of a win-win situation. Situation, wouldn't you agree? Right now.
Yes, so the broadcasters still want to try and hold on to some of the spectrum. I'm not entirely sure
what ICASA's viewpoint. I mean, one thing, yes, okay, they've given the go-ahead, obviously, to the Department of
ICASA is licensing the spectrum already. So part of the 5G licensing thing, that's the auction that's happening right now, where there's a bit of a fight between Telkom and MTN and ICASA and all that.
Because everyone wants their hands on the pie, exactly.
Right. So that's to be expected, and each one of those have their own pretty good arguments for you know why they think things should be a certain way, and that'll get sorted out either in court or in a settlement outside of court. This is honestly, it's part of the process. But at the end of the day, ICASA is actually already put into its auction process some of this digital dividend spectrum. And so this is why government needs to get out of those bands as quickly as possible, because the crux of MTN's court case against ICASA is about concerns over the fact that these frequency bands are not empty yet. So MTN's argument is, if government gets its money for the spectrum, it will have no incentive to actually force broadcasters out of these analog bands.
Now, I want to just pause you for a second, because
Yes.
we're talking about two multinationals. I mean, 2010 World Cup, I remember MTN was sponsoring aggressively, and Telkom had the rights also for the digital broadcasting at the time. Because if you look at your normal SABC with a Pani aerial, and if you had a DSTV, the quality was much more different, right? Now, they benefited in the 2010 World Cup with the rights of broadcasting, etc. So now, why are they so aggressive for this right now? I mean, so now they want to benefit, 11 or 10 years later for this new spectrum. I mean,
well, it's two separate things. So in the case of the World Cup, they paid top dollar in sponsorships for those rights. So they paid for that. Now with a new spectrum that's being released, they're going to pay for that too. So it's not like they invested here and they are reaping the returns here. They have to pay for both. And the spectrum auction now that's coming up, it's not chump change. We're talking billions of rands for the spectrum. And those billions of rands are going to flow directly into South Africa's ailing fiscus and help shore up Tito Mbowene's poor tax deficit.
Yes. I mean, this is definitely going to contribute to a bit more for his budget, as you mentioned, and hopefully lower, the interest rates, etc., which I think will be much better for our economy. Now, obviously, President Cyril Ramaphosa mentioned that the first switch off from next month in the Free State will begin Gauteng last. So it's not going to affect many metropolitan areas. It's going to focus mainly in these rural areas. Now, they're highlighting the Free State, but what about other provinces like Limpopo? I mean, National
Northern Cape,
yes, Northern Cape, far rural like Katu, etc. Why aren't they obviously going to get this as well, or is this forecasted at a later stage?
No, this has to be finished. The deadline that Cyril Ramaphosa has given to the minister, and I think this is in targets that she signed, and if she doesn't meet these targets, then there's problems. And so this has to happen by 2022 at the latest. And part of the reason I expect that they're focusing on the rural areas first is the specific spectrum that is used for these old analog broadcasts that now is going to get freed up in the migration to digital. It's lower frequency spectrum if you compare it to other, not if you compare it to other TV spectrum, but if you compare it to other cellular spectrum, it's fairly low frequency. Low frequency means wider coverage area on a single tower.
Yes.
It means better indoor penetration. So it is also useful in cities, but it is at its most useful in rural areas. So if you can switch off in the rural areas, then government will be able to go to the mobile network operators and say, look, we've switched off in the rural areas. Here's your 700 megahertz. Now roll out 4G there. And so I expect that that's the reason they're focusing on rural areas first.
Now you mentioned
is to free up the spectrum so that it's easier for the cell phone network operators to provide good mobile network coverage in those areas.
Now, I want to highlight securitization because sometime back we know, I think we had a discussion last year where even the minister and the president was quite aggressive about this, where some of the mobile towers like Vodacom, etc., there was battery theft, right? Now you're saying they're going to obviously give a rollout for 4G towers, etc. Taking the experience of last year with the theft and that theft syndicate, who obviously made a lot of money stealing those batteries, do you think they're going to perhaps now utilize a different strategy in terms of renewable energy for these towers? Or you think they're still going to keep battery? What do you think is going to happen here now?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So the thing is, even with renewables, solar panels get stolen. I would argue that solar panels are even more valuable than batteries. And so it's a tricky one. You're going to have to protect your infrastructure regardless of whether it's a wind turbine or a solar panel or a battery. And so, the mobile operators are faced with a tricky situation. And the strategy that they use is kind of multifaceted. So they go into the community and they explain, so they galvanize the community and they say, we have put up a tower for good 4G services in your area, for 3G, 4G, and even 5G is now in your community. But you have to help us protect that tower. If someone goes in there and steals the batteries, steals the cables, vandalizes the tower, you will not have service for months because that's how long it will take us to get spares up there to wherever
to
we
the
rolled out.
rural areas, yes.
Right.
And I mean, we talk in Free State. I mean, we're talking, some of the mountainous areas. Yeah, I mean,
Yep.
towards the Maluti Mountains, etc. The Kalaransport border, etc. Yeah, well, it's interesting to see, but you know what? It's good for residents of the Free State to finally get something so they can hard restart, as they say. Jan, it's always a pleasure chatting to you, my brother. This brings us to 8 p.m.
And you
Yeah,
too. Sorry, Tita, sorry.
No, but actually, well, I think I must WhatsApp Tito. I want to talk to him about this budget. We are marketing his strategy. Anyway, Jan, you have an awesome weekend. Until we chat again, thanks once again for your time.
You too.
Take care. It's Jan van Malen, senior journalist at My Broadband. And so Free State, talk to me. What are your thoughts on this, man? You guys are finally getting some sort of digitalization in terms of your spectrum. Interact with us on 0617660355. It's 8 p.m. on the dot, time for an ad break. When we come back, I speak to our football analyst, Rafiq James, and we're discussing the EPL and the PSL soccer matches coming up for the weekend. Stay tuned and keep it locked. We'll be back shortly.